I bought the house for peace. After 5 years of noise, deadlines, and a divorce that drained me dry, I didn't want luxury. I wanted silence. I wanted morning sun spilling across hardwood floors, the kind of quiet where you could hear your own breath, and neighbors who waved and then left you the hell alone. So when I found this modest little place on Willow Lake Drive, surrounded by trees, tucked at the end of a cul-de-sac, I thought I'd finally won. It wasn't perfect. The roof needed love. The backyard was a jungle of weeds and roots, and the siding? A faded, cracking eggshell beige that looked like it had given up trying to be beautiful a decade ago. But it had bones. Strong bones. And for the first time in years I could breathe. The first week was a blur of boxes and frozen dinners. I worked late into the evenings repainting the inside walls. Deep forest green for the study. Warm rust orange for the kitchen, like my grandma's. Colors that made the place feel alive again. And then came the exterior. I didn't want anything flashy. I wanted something timeless, something with soul. I chose a tone called cedar hearth, a warm, rustic brown with a touch of gold. It reminded me of autumn mornings and my grandfather's old barn. It felt like home. The painter started work on a Monday morning. By noon, I'd already caught the first glimpse of her, standing across the street in a pressed floral blouse, arms folded, lips thin as a thread pulled tight. She wasn't on the sidewalk. She was in her yard, but angled in just a way that made it impossible not to feel watched. Judged. She didn't smile. Didn't wave. I didn't think much of it. Maybe she just didn't like change. Or mornings. Or paint fumes. By Wednesday, she was out there again. This time, with a phone in her hand, snapping photos. Still, she hadn't said a word. It was Thursday when the first letter appeared. No stamp. No return address. Just a white envelope stuffed under my welcome mat, the name, HOA Compliance Notice, typed in bold at the top. Dear homeowner, your current exterior color does not comply with the Willow Lake Aesthetic Code. Please revert to an approved palette or face a daily fine of $150. No signature. No contact. Just that. I read it twice. 3 times. My fingers tightened around the edge of the paper. There was no code number. No clause cited. Just aesthetic code. What the hell did that even mean? I asked the painter if he'd ever seen anything like it. He just shrugged. Looks better than it did before. Want me to stop? No, I said. Keep going. That night, I walked to the small bulletin board at the corner of the cul-de-sac, the one supposedly used for official HOA business. It hadn't been updated in months. The last notice was about a bake sale. I found no list of approved paint colors. No rules. Nothing. The next day, the second letter came. This time slipped into my mailbox, which, by the way, is a federal offense unless you're the postman. Final warning. HOA fines will be retroactive as of paint application date. You are in violation. Still unsigned. Still anonymous. Still no actual rule cited. I walked across the street. She was pruning her roses, snipping in perfect little angles like she was operating on a patient. Excuse me, I said politely. Do you happen to know who runs the HOA around here? She didn't look up. We all do. That's not how HOAs work. She stood up, finally facing me. Her face was tight and powdered, like someone who never left her mirror unsupervised. We have a standards committee. The house colors were agreed on years ago. Is that written somewhere? Her smile was sharp. It's understood. You're new. You'll learn. And then she walked back into her house. That night, I stood in my driveway and looked at my half-painted home. The soft golden brown caught the glow of the porch light, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like mine. But I could feel it. The war was beginning. Because this wasn't about paint. It was about control. And Karen, I didn't know her name yet, but I could feel it in my bones. She was the kind of woman who needed to feel bigger than the room. The kind who thought a picket fence gave her power over others. The kind who die before admitting she didn't make the rules, she just enforced them when no one was brave enough to question them. Well, I wasn't afraid. And as fate would have it, I had no idea that the paint I chose would become my most powerful weapon, and the thing that would turn the entire neighborhood upside down. But that part was coming. Soon. Right after I found out exactly what Karen's face looked like, in full daylight. And how I could match it to a color code. There's something strange that happens when a stranger tries to shrink your space, your peace, your sense of home. You start by brushing it off. You tell yourself it's just a misunderstanding, maybe a miscommunication. But when it keeps happening, when every day comes with a new silent jab or hostile glance, you realize it's not a misunderstanding. It's an attack. A slow one. Surgical. Cold. And in my case, it was war. After Karen's thinly veiled threat about the house color, I started seeing things more clearly. The way she walked her dog twice a day, but always past my place. The way she paused when the painters were around. The way she stood just far enough from my driveway to pretend she wasn't watching, while definitely watching. I stopped sleeping well. I started feeling watched in my own living room. Until one morning, a neighbor named Peter approached me while I was cleaning my garage. Quiet guy, probably in his early 60s. He leaned on his cane and looked at me like a man who'd seen the same fire before. "She did it to us too," he said. "My wife cried for weeks when Karen reported our mailbox as off-brand. We had to replace it with a $400 approved version." "Is there a list of rules?" I asked. Peter smirked. "That's the magic trick. Karen is the list." That was the moment I snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But inside, a quiet switch flipped. And from that second on, I stopped being the new guy trying to fit in, and became the guy who was going to burn her little cardboard kingdom down with paperwork, evidence, and color swatches. That night, I pulled out every HOA document I could find. The welcome packet had mentioned a community covenant, but didn't include it. So I emailed the HOA email, no response. I called the listed number, disconnected. I went online and dug through public filings. Then I went to the county clerk's office, where I found the original HOA bylaws from 1997, still scanned in dusty PDFs that hadn't been touched in years. What I found made me laugh. There was a section titled Aesthetic Compliance that mentioned harmony with the environment. But nowhere, I mean nowhere, did it list an approved color palette. In fact, it explicitly stated that all aesthetic disputes must be reviewed by a 3-person board, elected annually, and confirmed by a vote with at least 30% of homeowners participating. When was the last time that happened? I knocked on 3 doors. Then 6. Then 10. No one had voted. No one had even heard of a vote. Karen wasn't elected. Karen had appointed herself. Now here's where it gets wild. In that same binder of outdated HOA rules, buried under old meeting notes and garden club minutes, I found a little clause under the section titled Community Expression, something called the Residential Art Provision. Residents may embellish or decorate their homes with artistic elements or symbolic tributes, provided they do not contain offensive imagery or discriminatory content. Artistic elements. Tribute. I had an idea so petty, so poetic, that I almost didn't go through with it. Almost. The next morning, I called a muralist. A professional artist I found online who specialized in abstract home exteriors. I showed him a photo of Karen, captured from my own doorbell camera when she came to shout at the painter. I said, "Can you take these colors, her face tone, her lipstick, her hair shade, and turn them into an abstract palette? Something symbolic. Something legal." He blinked. "You want your house to be her?" "No." I smiled. "I wanted to remind her that I'm not afraid." He grinned. "That's the best commission I've had all year." For the next 2 weeks, I didn't say a word. Karen watched the artist's work, standing by her roses, her arms crossed like she was trying to choke her own ribs. The mural took shape in slow, surreal ways. The front panel was painted in soft peach, just like her foundation. A swirl of blush pink and sandy beige swept across the top trim. Bright lipstick red lined the gutters like accent marks. The garage door had a hint of gray-streaked brown, just like her styled hair. But the masterpiece? The mailbox. We painted it pale beige with a curved oval of peach and 2 dark hazel specks above it. An artistic face. Not a real portrait. But unmistakable. And completely legal. When it was done, neighbors came to look. Some chuckled. Some applauded. Peter clapped from his porch. A woman from down the block brought me cookies and said, "It's about time someone gave her a taste of her own foundation." "Karen?" she exploded. The day after it was finished, she marched across my lawn screaming, "This is harassment! This is defamation! This is vandalism disguised as art!" I offered her lemonade. "It's a tribute," I said, "in harmony with the community. As per the HOA Clause 9.4, Artistic Residential Expression." She lost it. She filed a complaint. I received an official notice, finally with her name signed. But it was too late. Because I had already submitted a request for a special HOA vote. And I had 18 signatures. Out of 32 homes. Enough to hold an emergency board meeting. Enough to force an election. Enough to expose her fake authority. At that meeting, I stood calmly with a folder full of documents. I showed them the bylaw violation. I showed them the missing votes. I showed them the Venmo logs. Neighbors shared screenshots of fines she collected directly into her personal account. Then I played a clip from my security camera. Karen saying, "I am the HOA." The room erupted. She tried to speak. No one listened. She was removed. On the spot. By unanimous vote. 3 weeks later, Karen's house went up for sale. She left without a word. No apology. No confrontation. Just a moving van and a final glare that lasted 2 seconds too long. I repainted the house again. This time, a deep walnut brown with dark green trim. But I left the mailbox as it was. A tribute. A reminder. That silence doesn't mean weakness. That paint can be protest. And that sometimes, when someone tries to control your life with fear, fake rules, and HOA letters, the best revenge isn't loud. It's creative. It's legal. And it matches their exact skin tone. Perfectly. For 3 weeks after Karen left, the street breathed easier. Literally. No anonymous complaint letters. No sudden late-night knocks about inappropriate porch decor. No secret phone calls to animal control about barking dogs that never barked. The neighborhood started to heal. Kids played on front lawns again. Old couples brought out their folding chairs and waved to passing cars. For the first time, Willow Lake Drive felt like a neighborhood and not a regime. I thought the war was over. I was wrong. Because as Karen left, she didn't just pack her things. She left something behind. Something worse. It started with a white envelope. No name. Just, "To current homeowner," typed neatly on the front. Inside was a simple typed message. The painting was cute. But Karen wasn't working alone. And below that, a name I'd never heard before. Douglas Pinegrove, HOA founder, board chairman, and land title authority. A quick online search showed he was a real person. A lawyer. Retired. Lived just outside the city. He'd registered the Willow Lake HOA 22 years ago, and although his name hadn't appeared on anything in decades, technically, he still owned the land beneath every house. Not the homes. Just the land. The kind of clause that gets buried in 50-page purchase agreements most people never read. And suddenly I realized Karen was just the puppet. This man was the puppeteer. And the painting on my house? It was a declaration of war to someone who had stayed hidden for 2 decades. That week, strange things started happening. The artist who painted my home called to say someone left a dead bird on his studio doorstep, along with a note that said, "Stop decorating battlegrounds." Peter's trash cans were knocked over 3 nights in a row. and a code enforcement officer came by my place saying there'd been a formal request to inspect my foundation permits, something no one had ever questioned before. Then the notice came. It wasn't from Karen. It was from a law office in Pine Grove's name. You are in violation of Land Use Covenant Section 42F. Your structure, enhancements, and exterior art may be subject to review, removal, or revocation. Immediate compliance required. There was no return number. Just an address, on the edge of town. I didn't hire a lawyer. Not yet. Instead, I showed up to that address. It was a quiet old house, Victorian style, like something out of a courtroom thriller. I knocked. An old man in a dark wool cardigan opened the door. His eyes were sharp, gray, calculating. He didn't invite me in. You must be the artist, he said. The one with the brown house. I'm the homeowner, I replied. He smiled slightly. You think you won something. All you did was remove a rook. The king is still on the board. I don't play chess, I said. Exactly, he replied. That's why people like you lose. And then he closed the door. Back home, I called Peter. I told him everything. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that chilled me to the bone. There's something you need to see. Come to my house tomorrow. Bring gloves. The next morning, I arrived and found Peter standing at the edge of his backyard. He held a metal detector and pointed toward a crooked corner of his fence. When I moved in, he said, the realtor told me never to dig past the line. I didn't ask questions back then. But after what happened to you, I started to wonder. We dug. Just 2 feet down, we hit something. Metal. A small rusted box, like an old storage vault. Inside were original HOA documents, but not the sanitized, PDF scanned ones. These were handwritten, stamped, annotated in Karen's handwriting. And next to her name, in every clause, was Douglas Pinegrove's signature. He hadn't just created the HOA. He had built an underground system of power, using neighbors like Karen as his enforcers while staying legally protected from view. But the craziest part? One file in the box showed that 5 homes, including mine, sat on land zoned for commercial development. Which meant if the HOA were ever dissolved, Pine Grove could technically claim eminent domain and resell those plots to developers. He wasn't protecting the neighborhood. He was waiting for it to fall apart so he could profit. The mural wasn't a problem because it was ugly. It was a problem because it got attention. Karen wasn't mad about the color. She was scared it would wake people up. And Pine Grove? He was already trying to push me out, to stop the dominoes from falling. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not until I made sure the entire neighborhood knew who the real threat was. I spent the next week crafting a plan. First, I scanned every document from the rusted box. Then I contacted a local investigative reporter who specialized in housing scams and land fraud. I gave her everything. Then I waited. 3 days later, a story aired on evening TV titled, Suburban HOA Scheme Exposed, Hidden Clause Could Cost Homeowners Everything. Neighbors panicked. But they were also furious. That week, a neighborhood-wide meeting was called, not by the HOA, but by the homeowners themselves. We demanded answers. We demanded legal clarification. We voted, 26-6, to dissolve the HOA entirely and to start a legal process to revoke the original land use clause on the grounds of fraudulent disclosure and abuse of trust. Pine Grove tried to sue. But the news coverage, the neighbors, and public pressure buried him in so much attention that even the city stepped in to launch an investigation. By spring, the clause was removed. His grip was broken. Karen? She never returned. But that beige mailbox with 2 hazel dots? It still stood. Not as mockery. As a reminder. That paint can be protest. That colors can carry revolution. And that sometimes, if you dig deep enough, you don't just find truth. You bury the lie that tried to bury you. I thought the fire had finally gone out. After Pine Grove's power was stripped, after the HOA was dissolved, after Karen disappeared into whatever dusty suburb swallowed her, the neighborhood felt reborn. We had community barbecues again. Kids decorated sidewalks with chalk drawings. Even the most silent homes had started putting up porch plants and flags, as if each homeowner was reclaiming their front yard as a form of quiet rebellion. But peace is a strange thing. It can lull you, make you lower your guard. And that's when it strikes. It was early summer. A Friday. The kind where the sun stays up longer than it should, and the cicadas begin their song just as you sit down with a cold drink. I had just stepped outside when I noticed something odd on my garage door. At first, I thought it was rain. But it hadn't rained in days. I stepped closer. Red. Thick. Sticky. It clung to the mural like blood against skin. Someone had thrown paint. And not just any paint. It was lipstick red, the same color used in Karen's lips on the mural trim. Someone was trying to deface it in a language only a few of us understood. I stood there for a long time, the air buzzing in my ears like static. My hands tightened around the garden hose, but I didn't turn it on. I just looked. Because this wasn't just an act of vandalism. It was a message. Karen wasn't gone. Or someone who believed in her wasn't. I cleaned it off in silence. Neighbors walked past, hesitant, glancing, but no one said anything. That's the thing about post-conflict places. Everyone wants peace, but no one wants to admit it's still fragile. Later that night, someone rang my doorbell. I checked the camera. It was a young woman. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Nervous. Holding a folder. I opened the door. "Are you the one who painted the house?" she asked. "I am," I replied. "Who are you?" She hesitated. "I'm her daughter." I didn't have to ask. Her eyes said it. Karen's daughter. We sat on the porch. The folder sat between us like a bomb waiting to be opened. "I don't talk to my mother anymore," she said softly. "But I saw the news story. And I remembered things." "What things?" I asked carefully. "She used to take me with her to those HOA meetings. Said it was training. Back then I thought she was just passionate. Organized. But I realized something later. She wasn't trying to help the neighborhood. She was running a private game. She and Mr. Pinegrove. They called it the gatekeeper system." She opened the folder. Inside were photos. Notes. Handwritten letters. A ledger. Most of this is from her office. I went back last week when she was out of state. I think she's planning something. The ledger was filled with names, not just neighbors from our street, but from other communities too. Dates. Payment amounts. Fines that were never declared. I found Peter's name, $450. The lady with the tulip garden, $275. Even the artist who painted my house, fined $120 as an external contractor despite never being employed by the HOA. And then I saw something else. My name. Next to it. Flagged. "Do not push until Phase 3. Notify DP if media increases." My skin prickled. "What is Phase 3? I asked. She looked down. "She's planning to start a new HOA. Not officially. A private security company disguised as Neighborhood Watch. She's calling it the Covenant Project. She's working with developers Pinegrove New, ones who want to gentrify the area. She's coming back," I whispered. The girl nodded. "Unless you stop her now." I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I walked street to street. I showed the ledger to every neighbor who had ever paid a fine. Some cried. Some clenched their fists. Some couldn't believe they were part of a racket disguised as community order. We called an emergency town meeting. This time, it wasn't about votes or procedures. This was about truth. And exposure. I invited the news crew back. But I also invited someone else. Karen. Through her daughter, I sent the message. "Come defend yourself, or we'll do it for you." She came. Dressed in white. Still with that practiced smile and spine-straight posture, as if nothing had changed. As if she still ran things. She stood before the circle of neighbors and said, "I was only ever trying to protect the value of our homes." Then I handed her the ledger. "You mean by taxing your neighbors and pocketing the fines? By collaborating with developers to push people out?" Gasps. Whispers. Then I played the voicemail. One her daughter found. Karen's voice. Clear. Sharp. Cold. They'll resist at first, but once they realize they're surrounded by chaos, they'll beg us to control them again. The silence afterward was louder than any shout. Karen turned. Walked to her car. And never came back. Her daughter stayed behind. She didn't say much. Just looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Thank you for painting the truth." Weeks later, the mural on my house began fading naturally. The sun softened the reds. The peach tones blurred into the siding. But the mailbox, the one with her eyes, still stood. Not as revenge. Not even as a symbol. But as a reminder. That when someone paints over your piece, sometimes the only way to fight back is with color, courage, and community. And that even when they hide behind rules, behind titles, behind phrases like, "It's just policy." Truth, when painted in bold strokes, will always bleed through. Even if it takes a war to reveal it. The day Karen left felt quieter than it should have. There were no police sirens. No court orders being handed out. No dramatic public apology. Just the low hum of her Lexus gliding down Willow Lake Drive for the final time, her white blouse stiff against the window like a flag in retreat. But her damage didn't leave with her. It lingered. In the ledger entries. In the neighbors who felt ashamed for complying. And in the silence, the thick, heavy silence, of those who never spoke up while she ruled them. For days, no one knew what to do. We had no HOA anymore. No structure. No leadership. And that scared people more than Karen did. Because it meant they were finally responsible for their own voices. And most of them had forgotten how to use them. It was Peter who broke the ice. One morning, he rolled out a rusty grill into the middle of the cul-de-sac. Lit it. Threw on hot dogs. Didn't ask for permission. Just started flipping meat like the street was his own front porch. He taped a handwritten sign to a traffic cone beside him. Neighborhood cookout. No rules. Just real people. I stood beside him with a cooler. Others came out holding potato salad and drinks. Soon there were lawn chairs everywhere. Kids ran barefoot through sprinklers. Old music played from someone's Bluetooth speaker, the kind of music that made you forget you ever lived under someone else's rules. That's when the stories started coming out. One woman had been forced to remove the tree her father planted because Karen claimed it dropped too many leaves. Another man, a retired war vet, had been publicly shamed by the old board for flying a flag on the wrong day. A young couple confessed they'd almost sold their house because of the anonymous letters Karen used to send about their guests overstaying. And then came the unexpected one. A man in his early 30s stood beside the old grill. "I'm Alex," he said. "Karen's nephew." Silence again. But he didn't flinch. "I didn't agree with what she did. I told her often. But she never listened. She told me this place was her canvas, that she was painting order in a world falling apart." His eyes lowered. "But it wasn't order. It was fear. She painted fear." No one interrupted. Then he looked at me. "You repainted it. You didn't just take her down. You gave people back their colors." That moment sparked something. A woman named Janelle, a quiet artist who lived at the edge of the street, stepped forward and said, "What if we made it real? Not an HOA. Not control. But a collective. A place where we make decisions, not based on rules, but values. Storytelling. Expression. Humanity." We all stared. And then nodded. The next week, we formed something new. We didn't call it a committee. That felt too rigid. Too HOA-like. We called it the Porch Circle. Every Sunday evening, one house would host. No agendas. No minutes. Just people. Talking. Listening. Voting when something mattered. Laughing when nothing did. But that didn't mean the past vanished. One evening, Karen's daughter, Elise, returned. She didn't speak at first. Just sat quietly by the fire pit. Then she pulled a small notebook from her coat pocket. "I found this," she said. "It's hers." Karen's personal notes. Inside were ramblings, plans, and something else. Sketches. Sketches of my house. The mural. The mailbox. Words beside them. He thinks he's clever. But fire can be painted over. We all looked at each other. Elise took a shaky breath. "I want to paint something too. Something real. Something healing." We handed her a brush. The next morning, the neighborhood woke to find something new on the side of my garage. A single painted vine curling from the ground up the siding. At its base, a broken gavel. At its peak, a bird with wings spread, made from torn strips of HOA letters. And beneath it, in bold black paint, "Let them build fences, we plant roots." By summer's end, every house had added something. A painted dog. A field of tulips. A quote from Maya Angelou. One family painted their garage door to look like their baby's heartbeat from the first ultrasound, frozen in rhythm. This wasn't vandalism. This was rebirth. And in that rebirth, I saw something I hadn't expected. Not just freedom, but forgiveness. Even for Karen. Because control is a prison. But it traps the jailer too. And while I'd never welcome her back, I'd learned something bigger than revenge. You don't win by painting over your enemy. You win by painting through them. Until what they built fades. And what you built stays. It was never supposed to be more than a house. Just 4 walls and a roof. A place where I could quietly rebuild what life had torn apart. I never imagined it would become a symbol. A message. A headline. But sometimes the brush you hold in silence paints louder than every shout from a pulpit. By August, Willow Lake Drive had transformed. Gone were the cookie-cutter lawns and neutral-tone doors. Instead, each home had something alive on its surface. Some were simple, a small sunflower beside the mailbox, a handprint mural by children on the side gate. Others were intricate, poetry etched into wood panels, mosaic art built into fences, wind chimes made from broken fine notices and HOA letters turned into paper birds. What started as defiance became something softer, something sacred. People drove in from neighboring towns just to walk the street. Photographers snapped pictures like they were capturing some secret village no one had known existed. And then one day, the vans came. It began with a call from a local journalist named Amira. She had seen the first segment months ago, the one about Karen and Pine Grove's scheme, but she had no idea the story had evolved. She asked if she could visit. She didn't come alone. She brought a camera crew, a sound tech, and a documentary producer from a major network. At first, I was hesitant. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about the people, the neighbors, the stories, the art. But when I mentioned that to Peter, he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "That's exactly why you need to let them tell it. Because stories like this, they remind people that neighborhoods can be more than HOAs and threats. They can be home." They filmed for 3 days. They interviewed Elise, who stood in front of the mural she helped paint and spoke, for the first time, about the wounds her mother left, and the strange grace she found in watching that damage be transformed into beauty. They spoke to Janelle, who had never shown her art publicly before but now had neighbors commissioning her for murals, turning her garage into a studio. They sat with Peter, who revealed that he hadn't spoken to most of his neighbors in 20 years, until one bold paint job sparked a second life on his street. They even interviewed the kids, who had turned Karen's old rose garden into a pollinator sanctuary with recycled signs reading, "No rules. Just flowers." When the documentary aired, it was titled, "The Street That Painted Over Fear." It aired nationally. And the emails came flooding in. From Oregon. From Maine. from towns I'd never heard of. People asking how to start their own porch circle. Artists asking if they could volunteer to bring murals to suppressed communities. Families sending pictures of their reclaimed mailboxes, one of which was painted like a watermelon to honor the owner's grandmother who used to grow them in secret because her HOA said they were too messy. The movement had a name now. Porch Rebellion. And without trying to be, we had become its founders. I was still sitting with that fact one night when Elise knocked on my door. She held a small canvas in her hands. "I've been working on something," she said shyly. I invited her in. She unwrapped the painting. It was my house. But not the way it looked now. It was how it looked the very first day, when the cedar hearth color had just begun to cover the old eggshell siding, when the paint was still fresh and the war hadn't yet started. But on the canvas, the sky above the house wasn't blue. It was a burst of color, pinks, oranges, golds, and soft beige swirls, all cascading down like a sunrise caught mid-sentence. And floating above it, in tiny strokes, a single quote. "Every protest begins with a brush stroke." I stared at it for a long time. Long enough for Elise to speak again. "My mom tried to erase voices. You gave them back. And now, you gave me one too." Sometimes, war doesn't end with a bang. It ends with a whisper. With laughter around a porch circle. With a mailbox that still carries scars but also butterflies. With neighbors who wave longer than they used to. And with a neighborhood that finally realized it was never about fences or siding or codes. It was about belonging. And no paint can ever cover that again. Weeks passed. The colors on the street began to fade ever so slightly under the weight of late summer heat, and yet the spirit behind them felt stronger than ever. What once looked like rebellion now felt like tradition. The street had taken on a rhythm of its own, slow, thoughtful kind. Every Sunday, the porch circle met without fail. Laughter echoed between the houses. Meals were shared like secrets. Arguments were rare and resolved before sunset. Children roamed freely, as if boundaries had melted into brushstrokes and chalk dust. But underneath the peace, I began to feel something else. An itch in the back of my mind I couldn't quite shake. It wasn't Karen. It wasn't Pinegrove. It wasn't fear. It was a question. A quiet, uncomfortable one. What happens to people who build cages for others, and then disappear? The question returned the day I found the package. No return address. Just a simple cardboard box, left under my bench, sealed with red tape. Inside it, a notebook. A fountain pen. And a single folded letter. For the one who painted me back into focus. I knew the handwriting. Even before I unfolded the paper. It was Karen's. I held the letter for a long time. There was no rage in me anymore. No tightness in the chest. No adrenaline. Just a calm, quiet curiosity, like standing before an old mirror, wondering what version of yourself you might see reflected. Finally, I opened it. "They say control is a poison you drink hoping others will get sick. I used to believe I was saving people from themselves, from chaos, from disorder, from slipping into lives they'd regret. But I was just afraid of my own noise. You weren't supposed to fight back. People never did. Not until you painted something I couldn't explain. You turned rules into rebellion. And I didn't know how to breathe when I wasn't in charge. This isn't an apology. I'm not there yet. But it's a beginning. My daughter told me what you did. I haven't spoken to her since she was 17. And yet she told me she felt heard, for the first time. You took my silence. And gave it a voice. Even if that voice screamed in colors I couldn't bear to see. Thank you, Kay." I sat on the steps for a long while after that. The paper flapped gently in the evening wind. I didn't know what to feel. Forgiveness? Closure? Maybe both. Maybe neither. But what struck me most wasn't the words. It was the fact that she had written them at all. Even tyrants, it seems, feel something after the dust settles. Later that night, I brought the letter to Elise. She read it in silence. Her face a map of grief and grace. "I don't know if I want to respond," she said. You don't have to, I replied. Sometimes letters aren't meant to be answered. Just heard. She looked at me, eyes wet. It's strange. My whole life, I thought I was invisible. But somehow, a mural on a stranger's house gave me back my shape. We didn't speak for a long time after that. Some silences deserved to live a little longer. In the days that followed, I placed the notebook Karen had sent in the center of our next porch circle meeting. Blank. Open. And something amazing happened. People started writing in it. Not rules. Not minutes. But memories. Stories. Confessions. One page read, I planted my first garden here because I wanted something to grow that no one could take away. Another. I used to hide my partner when Karen walked by. Now we dance on the porch. Another. This place was a jail until we remembered we had the keys. Page by page, the notebook filled. Not with law, but with life. We called it the living ledger. It replaced the old one Karen had used to find people. And we made a promise. No one would ever be punished for being themselves again. No more silence sold as order. No more beauty buried beneath bylaws. No more shrinking. Only painting. Only growing. Only breathing, together. And then, one final twist. A few days before the equinox, a realtor came to our porch circle meeting. Young guy. Dressed sharp. A little nervous. I came on behalf of a buyer, he said. Someone who saw the documentary. They want to buy a house here. We looked around. None were for sale. But before we could answer, he added. They don't want to move in. They want to donate the home to the community. Turn it into a shared art house. For kids. For healing. For storytelling. A long pause. Then Janelle asked, Who's the buyer? The realtor hesitated. Then pulled out a note. It was typed. One sentence. Let the brush belong to everyone now. K. So maybe Karen wasn't the villain in the end. Maybe she was the warning. The mirror. The shadow behind the light. And maybe, just maybe, she found her own brush. In her own way. They say that every house has a soul. That behind the bricks and beams and silent halls, there's something deeper, something shaped not just by who built it, but by who lived in it, who fought for it. I used to think that was just something people said when they didn't want to let go of a home. But now I know better. Because my house? It watched a war unfold. It stood while battles were fought not with fists, but with colors and silence and courage. It absorbed everything. The rage, the fear, the laughter, the resistance, like old wood that remembers every storm. And it never once crumbled. Fall rolled in slowly that year. The sun dropped lower on the horizon. The wind carried a new sharpness. Leaves changed color as if trying to mimic the street itself, bold reds, burnt oranges, yellows so bright they looked painted on by hand. One afternoon, a group of local high schoolers came by with their art teacher. They had watched the documentary. They wanted to see the murals for themselves. One of the girls pointed at my porch. That's the house that started it, right? She asked. I smiled. No, I said. This is the house that listened. By November, the community art house was open. What had once been Karen's quietest ally, a home she used to manipulate neighbors into fear, was now full of light and noise and laughter. The garage had been turned into a mural studio. The kitchen served tea and soup to anyone who walked in. The upstairs bedrooms became creative writing spaces for teens and veterans and anyone who had a story they'd never been allowed to tell before. We called it the Color House. Its motto? Paint, don't punish. Its walls? Filled with art made from old HOA violation letters, shredded, repurposed, reshaped into new beginnings. One night, as I was leaving the Color House, I found Elise standing on the porch. She looked older. Not in a tired way. In a healed way. She handed me a final envelope. From her, she said. The last one. Found it in her journal before she left the country. I opened it at home. Inside was a single photo. A picture of my house. In its earliest days, freshly painted, proud, still half covered in painter's tape. On the back, one sentence. You didn't just paint over my rules. You taught me how to live without them. No name. No signature. Just that. I didn't cry. But I did sit for a long time, holding that photo against my chest, listening to the wind rattle through the trees, the old mailbox creaking ever so gently as if remembering the voice it once carried. We never rebuilt the HOA. Not because we couldn't. Because we didn't need to. The porch circle became the only structure we honored. Not out of obligation, but out of choice. And that choice, to lead with humanity instead of hierarchy, turned a street once ruled by fear into a place chosen by love. They say stories end when the villain is gone. But this one didn't. Because it was never just about Karen. It was about all of us. The neighbor who found his voice at 70. The daughter who forgave without forgetting. The mailbox that became a symbol. The paintbrush that started it all. And the house that stood silent through it, until it became a voice of its own. So if you ever find yourself on Willow Lake Drive, don't look for perfection. Look for the brushstrokes. The cracks painted over with joy. The sidewalk quotes left by children. The silence that now feels full, not of fear, but of freedom. And remember this. Some fences are meant to be painted. Some walls are meant to fall. And sometimes, all it takes to reclaim your story is a single, unapologetic coat of paint.